First of all, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure for me and Danielle to be here. As it was introduced here, I am from law school, and especially I work with social rights, constitutional social rights in Brazil. And that's why we are going to share a presentation where I'm going only to introduce the background of the constitutional social rights in Brazil that in some way help to understand some of the innovations that came with Bolsa Família program. In fact, we are nowadays in Brazil passing through a period where some of these new understandings about the constitutional social rights and different public policies are being done over there in Brazil. And that's what we are also working here as visiting scholars at UC Davis. So we're trying to study a little more about the relation between social rights and different public policies. Okay? Well, I'll start, and then Danielle is going to work with the program itself. And first of all, I would like just to make some backgrounds. I know some of you are Brazilian, so some of this information will be known by some of you. But it's something, it makes it easier to understand the context of this program. As Danielle is going to speak to you, this is a big public policy in Brazil. And but sometimes people sort of don't understand why such a big program. So I'm going to just give you some knowledge. They are not only law, but they are also social law and society explanations. First of all, it's a difference in political science. This is something very basic, but for Brazilians, especially in law and political science, we have to understand that we have a cultural, especially the legal culture, it is still involved in a most liberal state. What do I mean by that? I mean the protection from the state's power. So what happens? Law in Brazil was, until very recently, only in the way to protect from the state's power in individual matters. Since 1988, that's what the next slide I'm going to talk about our new constitution, this change. So we are working, and we are still working a lot about substantive justice or social justice. This is something new for Brazil, okay? Why? Because we have been through, then it's letter C, many years of dictatorship. We are not so even as the United States on rule of law. So what is the impact of this on our public policies? We are not used to public policies and social justice. This is something new, and it was introduced by the Constitution of 1988. And besides that, there is a very big gap between what is in law and what is in action in Latin America, not only in Brazil. What do I mean by that? 1934 and 1946, we have two constitutions with social rights. But you are going to see our first slides about the program. The inequality in Brazil shouldn't be so big if we really had followed the rule of law in these two constitutions and its social rights. The gap, the inequality, the numbers are really big. So we can see that although we have some constitution and some social rights, they were not followed by the government with public policy to decrease the inequalities. This is going to happen with 1988. Can you change for me? So what happens? I'll come back with the regulated citizenship in a minute. In 1988, we have a very big number of rights, individuals and social rights. Our Constitution now has 250 articles. This is a big, the Constitution itself represents a big difference from the past years in Brazil's history of between the relation between law and politics. So we started with 1988 with a more worried about social rights. And then you have between 193 and 232 all these social rights. Social protection, that's where we have health, social security, and social assistance. This public policy, the Bolsa Familia, is included in this one. Education, we have rights for protecting Indians, elderly, children, and adolescents. Environment, culture, science, and technology. These are all the rights in the Constitution to protect and changing something that we had before that is not so much worried with social justice. Even with in the constitutions that had these social rights as 1934 and 1946, what I told you is that the gap between what was in law and what really happened was really huge. So we are changing starting from 1988, the point of view for the social rights. It's not only on paper, but it's starting to happen. And that's why today we study so many public policies for this public policy and social rights. What I mean by the first one is something very interesting to understand also, especially some of the considerations about the conditionalities. In Brazil, we have been through a period that we call regulated citizenship. There is a very famous political scientist, Vanderlei Guilherme dos Santos, that work with this. What happened? Only citizens that had recognized occupations by the state had social security. So during many years, social security was only for the formal workers. This also changed in 1988, and so we have now the idea that the citizenship is universal. It's not only for some people. What makes it interesting for us now? Because Bolsa Familia is involved in what we call inclusion. So what happens with what the program is working is a sort of empowerment of people that are outside that don't have access to a lot of things that we are trying to work on. Daniel? Sorry. Mm-hmm. Well, and these two slides were for just a background, and now I'm going to start the support for social rights in this way, the support for the program and the public policies. Not only Bolsa Familia, but other public policies that are happening now in Brazil. The first one is social justice. What I mean is that we are working with the Constitution. These are things that I brought from the Constitution. The first one of our objectives of the state is social justice. So we are talking about a distributive justice, not commutative or not individual. We are talking about distributive justice. And therefore, in following it, we have the solidarity as another main idea to make it happen. A third one that I think is really interesting, and I'm working on it also, is human dignity. What do I mean with this as a support for Bolsa Familia? Another trend of studies and research about Bolsa Familia is working with, as I told you before, the empowerment. The citizen, the right holders that are receiving receiving the public policy, and this is in a way that they can exercise their citizenship as a minimum core for exercising democracy. So we are talking about things that are in some way empower the citizen to exercise democracy, to be a real citizen. You are going to understand it when you see the slides about the inequality in Brazil. We are not talking about people that are that only don't have a house. We are talking about extreme poverty in some areas of Brazil, in some of the numbers. So these people really need minimum core to exercise a minimum democracy. And therefore, we have also the objectives in the Constitution. As I told you, there are more objectives, but the ones that are interesting for us is, one of them is the construction of a free, fair, and solidarity society, so it is in the Constitution, and to exterminate poverty. So we have a background, a constitutional background for the public policy, although the public policy is not constitutionalized. Okay, the public policy, we have some social assistance rights, since some of you probably are studying, BPC is one, BPC, the benefit, it's a benefit for social assistance. This is in the Constitution. So we have some rights, social rights of social assistance in the Constitution. Bolsa Família is not constitutionalized, but it has a support in the Constitution for the program. And Daniel, I think you can begin now.
Okay.
Yes? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm not fluent in English like Julia, but I will try to speak in English. And first, I'd like to give a gift to the center and book about the 10 years of Bolsa Família program with different specialists in different areas discussing the results of the program, the conception of the program, and lots of things very interesting to researchers and who are interested to study Bolsa Família program. Okay, so it's a gift to the center. I will stay here. Now we'll talk specifically about Bolsa Família program, and only at the beginning showing that we had in the last 10 years, more than 10 years, the challenge of reducing the poverty and extreme poverty in Brazil. Yes, of course, it's not only because of Bolsa Família program. There are other reasons for that, like the economy, the minimal wage in Brazil increasing these periods, and in education results for the population. But it's possible to realize that during the time we had a decreasing of the poverty, extreme poverty in Brazil in a way very fast comparing with the other periods. Okay, if you see in percentage, we had this decreasing, and if you see within numbers in million people, we had a significant reducing of people in extreme poverty or people in a poverty situation, although we had some millions of people in this situation. We had this challenge already to be faced, okay? But considering that Brazil has a history of social inequalities, we had a big transformation in this period. So let's talk specifically about the Bolsa Família program. It's the largest cash transfer program in the world, and it's possible to analyze, to point out some questions to our analysis here. For example, how the Bolsa Família program is important in Brazil to emphasize social inequality issues in Brazil's public policy agenda. We will see during our conversation that Bolsa Família is not only a cash transfer, is beyond of this, yes? And it's important, this question, to think about how it's important to reinforce the public policy agenda in Brazil, considering social inequality questions. How the Bolsa Família, PBF is an abbreviation of Bolsa Família program, is important to face inequalities in Brazil. Okay? And how Bolsa Família program is important to help breaking the intergenerational poverty cycle in Brazil. in this case specifically, the important role of the conditionalities. I am director of conditionalities of Bolsa Família program in Brazil. I am working with this matter from 5-6 years, and it is an important point to be considered in our discussion. Okay, next. First step to be registered in Bolsa Família program is necessary. Previously, the family be registered in the single registry, the Cadastro Único dos Programas Sociais. We have in Brazil a single registry with 20 millions of families with different information about socioeconomic questions, address, different information about the individuals, about the families, so important for public policies and for studies, with different and interesting information about the people and families in poverty situation. That's because I can say that nowadays the poorest in Brazil, the poor people, families in poverty situation, isn't more invisible as in the past. It's possible to see for public policy and for studies. And the Bolsa Família is the most important program in this large context, with different initiatives to support these poor families in different areas. Next. Bolsa Família program since 2003 is an integration of various isolated cash transfer programs. Before, we had cash transfers related to education, to health, and in other areas, and the Bolsa Família program integrated these different initiatives, focus on family. Different initiatives focus on family. Nowadays, the coverage of Bolsa Família program is more than 14 million of families. In Cadastro Único, in single registry of families, we have 20 million of families. But specifically for Bolsa Família program, the amount of families is about 14 million of families receiving Bolsa Família program. Okay? The average benefits monthly is about $70. The rapid changes in the relation between real and dollars is so quickly, especially in the recent days. But it's possible to think that in real is about, in dollar is about $70, the average benefit monthly. The annual budget is about 25 billion, yes, reais, and $10 billion annually, okay, and 0.5% of GDP. It's not so strongly balanced in the budget if you think about the larger view in the economy. So we have an automatic grant of benefits, is automatic, and consider it as high priority some characteristics of families. For example, of course, the monthly income per capita, and we have an eligibility criteria considering families in extreme poverty and families in poverty situation. So per capita income of 77 reais, and between 77 reais and 154 reais. And some considerations if the families has an amount of children and adolescents, if there is pregnant or nursery woman, some criteria, some aspects consider importance to define the participation, the entry in the Bolsa Família program. Next. So, Bolsa Família is a conditional cash transfer. It's not only a cash transfer. So, there are responsibilities in education, in health area, and I will talk about later about these responsibilities, not only the families, but the power public, but the government. but the public sector. That is the most important to think about conditionalities. The commitment of the public sector, more than the families. We'll see that later. Focus, of course, on the poorest families, and Bolsa Família is considered a well-focused program by different Brazilian and international studies about the focus of the Bolsa Família program on the poorest families. Free use of money. There isn't any regulation about where the family has to use the money. It's free use. The independence of the family, the build of family, what is most important, where to use the money. With three main objectives. The immediate alleviation of the poverty with the cash transfer, the break of intergenerational poverty cycle, considering that the children in the school, in the primary school, in secondary school, finish this basic education is essential to face the poverty in the future. So the view of the importance of the conditionality as a help for the break of the intergenerational poverty cycle and the family development. Because in Brazil in the last years, we had the connection of the Bolsa Família program with different public policies. Not only education and health, but in labor market, training, many areas focus on in this population to develop the opportunities. We had in Brazil in the last years the plan Brazil without poverty, extreme poverty. We had the presence, my friend here and colleague Marcelo Cabral. He was director in this area in the last years. And some features about the Bolsa Família. First, the families are automatically included in the program. It's not a of any politician or on personal decision about this. The family is automatically included, considering the profile, the family's profile in Cadastro Único, in single registry. So it's very important. It's not a personal decision. Families remain in the program while they have income below the eligibility criteria, without mandatory period of stay. So minimum of 2 years, and then there is regular checking of the information in average in each 2 years about the situation of the family, but without mandatory period of staying. Benefits paid directly to families using federal bank cards. It's not money given to families, but using federal bank cards. Considering that Brazil we have a national bank, where it's possible for any municipalities to use this card and use the money. All operation registered in system. That's essential. Think about Bolsa Família as a program. All operation informations of benefits or conditionalities in systems. Okay, it's possible to see each family, each individual participant of the program. What is the situation? That's so important. So we have some rules about conditionalities: education and health. Education, school attendance is the conditionality, considering the difference between the ages. Yes. And in the health, nutrition monitoring for pregnant and nursing, as well as to children up to 7 years of age. Prenatal and postnatal care, and immunization records for children of up to 7 years of age. What are conditionalities? Of course, conditionalities are commitments, but especially of the government, especially of the public sector, better than the government. Public sector, government, from family beneficiaries in education and health. Ensure the universal rights in education and health established in the federal constitution, as Julia said, calling attention to social inequality issues. It's important, the whole of the Bolsa Família program in Brazil, especially to calling attention for everybody, not only in the public policy, for the society in general, for the citizens in general, for the media, for the researchers, for the university, about social inequality issues. That's an important role of Bolsa Família program in Brazil. Main features extend the access to basic service in health education and social assistance, identifying and action on social vulnerabilities of Bolsa Família families by social assistance. If you realize that we have problems in compliant conditionalities in health and education, the social assistance is oriented to help these families to maintain the conditions. You have to consider that the inequalities are still high in Brazil, in spite of the changes in the recent years, but it's still high. Okay? For education, for example, if you think about all people with 16 years old, all people with primary education completed, with full primary education, that's an age more than that for this. Consider income profile. If you see the pools in the regions, we had better results comparing 2001 with 2012. Of course, the results are important. The improvement is significant, is very interesting, but we have still less than 50% of these teenagers without primary education completed full. So that's because it's important to build the public policy considering these inequalities. Conditionalities is a large-scale operation. Of course, Brazil is a big country, 200 million of inhabitants, and we have, with conditionalities, more than 15 millions of students monitored monthly with educational results, school attendance registered in systems. Okay, we have almost 9 million of families monitored in health with that information in systems individually. About 150,000 schools in Brazil with at least one PBF student there. These schools, more than 70,000 schools with majority of students from Bolsa Família program, and import programs in education and health who consider this public as priority. So a large strategy to try focus on this population. This public policy is very difficult, detailed, sophisticated. It's necessary to involve many areas and federal levels working together. If you think a big country as Brazil, it's not easy, but it happens considering the intersectionality, because education, health, and social assistance working together, and the federal levels in Brazil, municipalities, states, or federal level. More than 5,000 municipalities, okay? All municipalities participating in the program. Non-compliance, that's a very important point to think about the whole of the conditionalities. Normally the conditionalities is a controversial issue when you think about conditional pressure program. And the conditionalities indicate family difficulties in accessing education and health services. As I said before, the informations are nominally from each individual, each family in systems. So it's possible to realize what are the difficulties of families to comply with conditionalities. Of course, low school attendance, or school dropouts, or without prenatal care or immunization. Next. And in 2012, we changed the legislation about conditionalities with an important decision where the center of responsibility about non-compliance is essential considered to the public sector. No more is only for the families, individuals. No family will have its benefit cancelled without first followed by social assistance support. Okay? For example, we have only nowadays this percentage of benefits from families cancelled by conditionalidades non-compliance. In other times, I think the next one. In other times, before. In other times, we had thousands of people being cancelled by conditionalities. But it's not sense, because it's necessary to help the families. The public power give attention with the problems, because if the children don't attend schools, the problem is not because the families don't want, or the children don't want. It's necessary the social assistance gives support for the family. So for at least 1 year, the social assistance for the families who don't comply conditionalities many times have to stay close to families. That's because nowadays we have so tão pequeno, né, so few low results of cancellation in conditionalities. First, some results about conditionalities in a health area. We had recently an important article in American Journal of Health studying Bolsa Família program, considering municipalities with a lot of families programs with other municipalities, and it's possible to realize that PBF has a key role in reducing childhood mortality in children below 5 years old, especially if we consider diseases related to poverty. So it's possible to search, to read this article with these important results. And in education area, it's possible to see the reducing in school dropout rates. Okay, in this dark green, in this light green, we have students with Bolsa Família program and students without Bolsa Família program from public schools. Okay, and you can realize that the students with Bolsa Família program always they have low dropout rates than the other students who are from public school but don't receive Bolsa Família program, especially in the region more poor in Brazil, the poorest region in Brazil, and especially if you see in secondary education. And here is secondary, and here is primary education, okay? Here is primary education, here is secondary education. So we can realize that the objective of entry and permanence in the school, even the difficulties of these schools, because these students study in the worst schools of Brazil, considering infrastructure conditions, even a lot of another questions, they permanece in program. And if you see data about school approval, okay, and in the end of the year, if the students get approval, we can realize that here is primary education, here is secondary education, okay? It's possible to realize that only think about the Brazil in general, or think about the poorest region in Brazil, Northeast. It's possible to realize that in primary education, here secondary education, we have worse results for students from Bolsa Família program. They are entering in the school with difficulties, but when they reach the secondary education, they got better results than the other students. If you see the poorest region in Brazil, always the results are better from students from Bolsa Família program, then the other students that are from public school, public sector, but not receiving Bolsa Família program, showing that during the time, if the state, if the public sector supports these families, it's possible to see results, okay? Better results in school trajectory. That's important to point out this. So, the Bolsa Família is a social protection non-contributory, and access to various services, programs, projects, and benefits in the perspective of the social development. The Bolsa Família program is a program which deals with different public policies to face poverty and inequality questions beyond the income transfer. Okay, the low-income population, the poor population, isn't invisible anymore in Brazil. For us who works with public policies, for researchers like you, it's possible to study, to realize, to think about this population in Brazil because we have a lot of information. Okay, and the Bolsa Família program is important to connect different public policies to act in a favor of these families, like we had in the recent years with different initiatives in Brazil, who this population is considered essential for different policies in Brazil. The last slide, only some challenges, but of course we have another challenges about Bolsa Família program. It's only some suggestions. Maybe naturally we have another points to discuss. The challenges of proving intersections of public policies for the poorest, considering PBF as the main reference. Okay, it's necessary to avançar, né? To advance the Bolsa Família as a gateway for different public policies. Okay, because in this case we can put on the table in Brazil that it's necessary consider social inequalities clearly, so it's necessary improving this challenge. Improve cooperative action among the government levels, because Brazil is a federalist country, so we have to discuss with different actors in these federalist levels how to act. Okay, so it's always necessary to improve this cooperative action. Improve the communication with Brazilian society. Okay, political resistance, especially from the middle and upper classes. We had a national election a few days ago, and the Bolsa Família programs was in the center of the debates, and we had many prejudices about Bolsa Família program. So Brazil has an history of inequalities. So it's necessary always to improve the communication with the Brazilian society. Okay? Connect with this better understanding of PBF's objectives and roles for beneficiaries in society, improving the social participation. And one challenge to think about a possible transition is some debates in Brazil about a transition from government policies to state policies. Yeah? Some people think it's necessary, others think it's not necessary. Ensuring an adequate budget for the program and stable continuity. Only reference of legislation for any researcher about Brazil with different federal ordinances or laws about Bolsa Família programs. And thank you very much for your attention with us. Yes. No problem. Você me ajuda no inglês. Okay.
I know.
Yeah, you could go ahead and call on.
I I will? Okay. Here.
Okay.
I have a question. So when you talk about the single registry, are citizens of the favelas registered with that?
Yes, the single register is for every families who has an poverty situation below an official an poverty line in the single register below of the half of minimum wage. And for any family of any region, of course, it's possible to be registered in the single register. And there are more people in the single register, 20 millions of people, than the Bolsa Família program, because the Bolsa Família program, the poverty line is slightly low, slightly below than the single register, because in the single register it's possible to have this population for other programs also. And of course, people from favelas or people from poor region are basically the people registered in this system with different information.
Can I go? Okay, so my question is that there's multiple countries that have tried social programs such that give out monetary compensation, and such as France, and it has been proven that programs such as those actually only work in the short term. Bolsa Família has the same ideas as Bolsa Escola, which was introduced from Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and so this type of social program with monetary compensations has already been going on for over 20 years. What are some of the incentives that you're giving to the population to not be reliable on the government with the money, but also being able to exit from this type of support? Because if you're not incentivizing for them to actually attend school and get some work, then what are you actually doing for them to leave the compensation and actually be able to produce and make sure that Brazil actually sustains itself?
Entendeu? A história de ensinar a pescar, ou seja, como as pessoas vão sair. Esse é o discurso normal. He's going to explain.
Okay, sorry.
We have a Portuguese expression that helps to understand what you said.
I think that the state, the public sector, the society has the responsibility with our citizens. And if you have, and as we have in Brazil, a history of social inequalities, and it's difficult to realize that in a few years, these adults without schooling can have conditions for a whole life and a self-condition to survive. Without schooling, because they are adults. Of course it's important to have training programs. Of course it's important. And there are a lot of training programs for this adult population, poor adult population, and it's always necessary to have this program. But our society, our state, our government has the responsibility, because the state is responsible for these adults because they don't have education. And if they don't have education now, with 40 years old, with 50 years old, that's not because these adults wanted this. That's because, okay, the state don't have the attention for the situation.
É que ela quer também saber o que o cidadão, como é que o cidadão não sabe que ele não vai ter aquilo para sempre. Entendeu? Ou seja, a ideia de que ele vai ficar que o programa é só um periódico, só por um tempo.
Yes, yes.
Porque normalmente os programas são curtos, eles não prosseguem.
Yes, the Bolsa Família program is not a constitutional question, okay? That is a program. So we don't have an official constitutional.
Não é isso. Não.
Como é que a pessoa...
Você fala português.
Mas meu português não é tão bom.
Tá.
O que eu perguntando é que se uma pessoa está recebendo os benefícios, ela só vai receber esses benefícios que você tem a idade, que era de 6 a 18 anos, certo? Mas só que também a porcentagem das pessoas, eu não entendi direito, só 85% das pessoas que têm de 6 a 15 anos, que é a
Não, qual é a funcionalidade aqui?
condicionalidade.
Daniela,
85% das presenças na escola.
Ah, tá.
Puxa,
Mas são crianças.
Mais?
Outro,
Aqui?
outro. Não, olha só. Eu vou explain em
Mas
português.
o que eu estou perguntando é se as pessoas estão recebendo da escola, estão recebendo o dinheiro para se alimentar e tudo mais, esse dinheiro só vai ser por alguns anos, certo? Depois, as pessoas teriam que continuar a escola. Como é que você vai prever que elas não fiquem dependentes do governo?
é isso, entendeu? Dependência.
There isn't a specific time for receiving the Bolsa Família program. Okay, it's the first point. There isn't. So it's possible to receive the Bolsa Família program during the years. Of course, that these children who attend school, finish basic education, finish secondary education, these children will be adults with more condition to stay in the labor market and to have conditions of different conditions from their families, and they won't receive Bolsa Família program in the future because the condition that these families will have in the future, considering that these children and adolescents will have a bad education with condition to stay in the labor market, for example. So it's necessary to think about generation questions. If you think about the families nowadays with adults without schooling conditions, okay? Analphabetos, illiterate people, yes? It's very difficult for these adults, I will think about two situations, okay? It's very difficult for these adults to have a sustainable condition to stay in the labor market, to stay with a reasonable condition for surviving, considering their profile. Because they don't have schooling, for example. Of course, training initiatives for this population are important, and there are a lot of training opportunities for this population. But it's not enough to face the problem of that family. But considering these children studying at school, finish secondary education, for example, these future families will have another condition, very probably without the needs to have the Bolsa Família program.
It's about breaking the poverty cycle.
Yes, that's it. The idea is to get out of the program, not to stay in.
Okay.
Okay?
Just mention something of the problem that is perhaps very important as an answer to that. The Pronatec is something important. So, as well as providing cash, money for these families, the government also provides training for adults or for the families is more than 500 courses, professional courses, yes? So that is also perhaps a way to exit the Bolsa Familia, or at least is a way to kind of give them some sort of alternative to Bolsa Familia. So it's not just that the government's giving the Bolsa Familia, not in any other initiative. There is this, particularly, I think Pronatec is one of very important.
That's why I told you about the empowerment. The idea of the conditionalities and of the program in this area is to empower. It's not only to give the money. It's because it's the student is on school. He is attending school. So in future years, the idea is that naturally the family will get out of the poverty, and so will not need the Bolsa Familia. The idea is that, but we have so much inequality that it's going to take longer period.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
that's it.
Yeah.
All right, that's the start. Todd, I don't know if I no, I'm not. He's the teacher, professor.
Professor has no idea, not?
Okay, well, my question's related to this one.
Oh, okay, well.
I think I'll say it in English.
Okay.
But, so it's related to this. So there's some studies I know by political scientists in Brazil, like Cesar Zupo and others, who show that the conditionalities have a big role to play in augmenting middle-class support for the program. So actually, if you describe the program as a conditional program that enforces conditionality, support for the program goes up relative to unconditional cash transfers. So I'm curious about two things. Since we have since you're director of conditionalities, I'll take advantage to ask you about this. One is does this play any role in thinking about conditionality? So you gave an explanation for the existence of conditionalities focused on their effect on families, but is there some consideration of the political logic that having conditionalities in the program is also useful for increasing communication with middle class and upper class audiences, which is one of the challenges that you mentioned on your last slide. And secondly, if that's true, the fact that there's a social assistance program which intervenes with families that are not complying with the program, which should have an important social welfare rationale because you want those families to continue with the program. Nonetheless, it results in, as you said, conditionalities that aren't maybe as widely enforced as they otherwise would be. I think you said 0.002% of the families actually drop out of the program. So is there any trade-off there? If you enforce the conditionalities more strongly without the social assistance, maybe that helps with the acceptance of the program among the upper classes, middle and upper classes.
Yes, I think normally the conditionalities is a way to have the support of the middle, the upper classes. Normally it is. But including with the view of penalties, yes? But we had a change in the recent years. Maintain the idea of the conditionalities, but not with the individual focus only. So we maintain the idea of the conditionality because I think the conditionality is important, especially for public policy. Because in country with inequalities, like Brazil, to have conditionalities, it helps to call attention of public policies. For example, with Ministry of Education now, the attention about the poor students is higher than before. Because we are calling attention with the data, with the conception, with the idea about this public. So I think that first, the conditionality is important to call attention of public policies, considering unequal countries like Brazil. It's not usual, not normal, not natural to think that the people in general will think about inequality because your country is unequal. So the conditionalities help us to improve the attention of the society. The second, normally conditionalities is a way to have the middle class and upper class support, normally. And the last point, of course it's normal, but call attention of public, the middle and upper class considerando melhor, né? Considering better the Bolsa Família program, but we got an important change when nowadays the idea of the punishment is not central. Because if you see families who have difficulties in these basic questions, the public sector has to give attention for the family with social assistance support. And we had in Brazil in the last 10 years an increasing of this social assistance area with the social policies being developed in these recent years. So we changed the view about the conditionalities, call attention for the public sector. These 3 points.
Just for an example, if a child doesn't attend school, the child might be a victim of violence in the family. It's not going to school, he or she is not going to school because he doesn't want to, because he has a family problem, and the state has to help the family. We are changing, the conditionalities is changing the way you look for the program. Wait, here. Now I'm going to stand up. So.
I really appreciated the introduction of the insertion of social and individual rights into Brazil's constitution. And while class is one facet of social injustice in Brazil and many developing countries, I'm wondering if is there a conversation in Bolsa Família being talked about not only class but also gender and race, considering that women receive more than 93% of the direct cash transfers. So what is being done to like empower not only the children who are growing up with education opportunities that maybe they didn't have before, but like the recipients themselves?
There's a study, Valkyria. I think you are studying.
My
Sure.
question is related to,
Oh, okay.
the questions, so I think I should go in now as well. I think this is, the Bolsa Família has made a revolution in Brazil in terms of changing social inequality and taking people out of poverty, especially extreme poverty. You know, everyone can see that, it's very clear. But then I ask you to, in particular Daniel, perhaps because as a member of the ministry, and I was in the ministry as well, you know, and whether that's not the time, perhaps we are 12 years on the program, where we should consider gender an integral part of the program, and we start to have gender in the, gender in the planning of the program and on the evaluation of the program. Because when you talk of the family, when you say that family have to comply with the conditionalities, you actually are talking of women, because 94% of the recipients of the programs are women. So this is a program, I haven't seen such a thing. You know, you have a program that is for women in a way, but it's yet, you don't add a gender dimension to the program. And I understand that perhaps we had such a huge inequality, and I understand how difficult it is to deal when we're dealing with policies. We have so many things to look into. I was there, I know how difficult it is when you are working with the, you're working with social policy. But then, so coming from that background, yes, so I have lots of sympathies with the limitations that we have. I ask whether we could be doing something. We are being like examples for other countries in terms of poverty alleviation. Why don't we start doing things in terms of gender, understanding? We have all these numbers for children. Why don't we have similar numbers for women? So we know that lots of women are uneducated, or they have lower levels of, of schooling. But couldn't we do something for that? So I'm trying to think here in terms of, what could we do in terms of raising women's capabilities, as Amartya Sen would say. Kind of improving women's ability to get out of a situation, rather than making them responsible for looking after the children. So in a way, as some families say, we are, and I don't agree completely with that, but we may just be reinforcing a traditional gender role by which women stay at home looking after children and being responsible for the conditionalities. And so I'm just saying that in order to say the following, I think we could go further. This is it's a great program. We just could, I think, do something more in terms of gender. And by saying that, I know that we have, for instance, increased the numbers of childcare for women over here. So we have increased the places tremendously, the number of places in crashes, and also we have increased the number.
I'm sorry, could you shorten your
Sure,
question?
yes. So my question is, Danielle, for me, whether you think that there are room for improvement in terms of gender. It's just your idea, I suppose. And also, well, it's related to Isabella.
While he thinks, I'm not going to answer, but I'm going to give you a hint, because I research a lot about social rights in the law field. And maybe what will help, I don't know how he's going to answer. I think he's going to answer that he doesn't know. But how we introduce gender. But I think what our public policies need to work better in Brazil nowadays, social rights, and that includes all the law field, is we had a policy of rights. The Constitution introduced the rights. Basically, that's what happened. I think what we need to do now is to work on the right holders, and that includes gender. What I mean is to start studying who are the sujeitos de direitos, the right holders that are benefit, because we have this tradition of saying that we benefit the rights, the social rights. We are not benefits, we are right holders. That's why I began, we have this idea, we are working on it, because it's not a benefit. Social assistance is not a benefit, it's a right. If you change the way you see it, you can understand it. Maybe then it will work with the gender, I think. Daniel.
As we know, the Bolsa Família program allows to women to have more power in the families, receiving the cash transfer, comparing with the men with living together. The woman through the time, had more empowerment, being responsible for receiving the cash transfer. Some studies show that the woman's independence increased for the fact that she is responsible for receiving the cash transfer. But the Bolsa Família program is so interesting and still new and so large that we have a lot of possibilities to think about the Bolsa Família for the future, considering not only gender questions, but a lot of other questions. And we don't have a specifically answer, of course, for this, only for the future, considering that this potential of the Bolsa Família program.
No, I just want to comment on that. I have just did a recent study about Bolsa Família, and I saw many studies showing like the empowerment of women, but normally they're international studies. So what I can see, I'm also Brazilian, and the issue of gender in Brazil is just like, we don't bring that to discussion, you know, that's like, the first thing that we're going to discuss now is like class, but I think we have to advance a lot of things like related to gender equality. So I think that's like a next step, and I think we have to hold accountable for that. But I agree with you, that's really relevant.
Valkyrie Leão has.
I know Valkyrie,
Yes.
she talks about voice.
Very
Yes.
interesting book about
It's a very nice.
yes, the
Incredible.
importance. Yes, very important.
But normal- But we don't discuss that in the Brazilian society. It's more like
Yes.
with like international issues.
She was raising.
I have time, I'm sorry, we have time just for this one last question. But before we go into the question, I wanted to thank you for the book, and we'd be happy to make it available to anyone who may want to access it after this talk. So thank you very much. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask if there's room in the labor market for all of these newly educated people, if there are actually jobs for all of these people.
Tem empregos para todo mundo que está saindo.
Sem problema?
É, assim, as pessoas.
No, so of course we don't have so in this labor market.
But think this way, we have, there are not jobs for everyone in anywhere, but think as a way that you have people with more capacity to the market, to work. The thing is not to have jobs for everyone. You don't have jobs for everyone here, right? But at least now people are have more capacity to get a job. And I think the big challenge, and what is really nice now, but what really the issue here is the inequality. We are not talking about, especially the Americans here who might not know Brazil. We are not talking about homeless. We're talking about extreme poverty. It's not such people who don't have a house. They don't have what to eat every day. When you ask about favelas are nice places. We are not talking about favelas, some of them today. We are talking about people that are sometimes not are in favelas, because favelas in the United States are not our favelas are worse than probably what you know about favelas.
Last comment about Bolsa Família program. How can we Saída left? Yes? Saída left. No, talk about Saída. We talk about in Bolsa Família program about the living of the program. Yes. Normally is a exit of the program.
Good. Yes.
And as a central goal, I think it's not in the moment, our contest is not a central goal. It's necessary to have a more equal society. Of course, it's not depend only with Bolsa Família program, of course. It's necessary to consider educational questions, economic questions, of course, the process of changing of Brazilian societies during the time. But during this time, it's necessary to think, especially in Bolsa Família program, as an opportunity to consider the inequalities. Not so especially, so quickly about the hesitant. We have to consider in Brazil the principle of the solidarity, of the dignity, as an important conception concept in Brazil. That's because I think, of course, it's necessary to think about training, developing opportunities, of course. But more than hesitant, it's necessary to consider entry and the attention of public policy and of our society about this population. I think it's my last comments about our discussion.
Thank you to both of you.